By a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of the district attorney, Cyrus Vance.
I expect Cy Vance to move incredibly fast. I think it's totally possible for all of this to come out before the 2020 election in terms of New York's prosecutors getting this information and acting on it.
New York's DA won that blockbuster case against Trump, and tonight's news is showing he is moving quickly, taking that victory to demand Trump's records and shedding light on how the case could involve these allegations of fraud against Trump. The very lawyer who called much of this joins us to break it down right now. The prosecutors in this case are citing other public evidence of Trump's alleged fraud, including Michael Cohen's congressional testimony. They want to use this evidence to demand 8 years of Trump's personal and corporate tax returns that may establish if Trump or his company committed bank or insurance fraud.
Did the president or his company ever inflate assets or revenues?
Yes.
And was that done with the president's knowledge or direction?
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
Did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes.
Joining us now is the lawyer we saw right there on that breaking news day, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
You called it. You spoke at the time about the implications and the speed. Walk us through this development.
Yeah, so I've always felt like this could go very fast, and I think that's what we're really seeing play out already now in these court maneuvers over the last week. The last time around, Judge Marrero, the judge presiding over this case, ruled in a matter of 3 weeks. This time it's even easier, and I think it can go very fast for that reason. The Supreme Court said in that landmark hearing last month that Trump doesn't have any extra protections because he's the president. He has the same protections that you and I have. And so he's now come into court and said, well, this subpoena is too broad from the Manhattan prosecutor and it's made in bad faith. And these are the last ditch arguments of losers. These aren't good arguments. Even if there is something that's too broad in the subpoena, there's a core here that isn't. And I'm so glad, Ari, that you played stuff that, a lot of us forget about because there have been so many different Trump scandals. But the stuff about Michael Cohen and the insurance fraud and the hush money payments and all of that, that's front and center in what this investigation's about. And the judge, I think, doesn't need to have oral argument on the case. I think he can look at these papers and decide this very fast.
Well, and it's a huge deal for folks who are keeping track of more than one thing in their lives and in America right now that the Manhattan DA scored this Supreme Court victory and now is back in court getting these materials, as you say, with very little legal foundation for the pushback, to decipher, to investigate whether there was fraud by Donald Trump or his company. And I will say this as a legal reporter, and I'm sure you would agree with me as an attorney and member of the bar, if the evidence doesn't support it, if there's a finding after they look over everything that there's no fraud, fine, great, you move on. That does happen. But if there is a fraud, if there is this kind of activity going on, there's a nexus for criminal prosecutors in New York to get into it. I want to read briefly just from some of the reporting in the New York Times for you to walk us through what it means when they say, well, attorneys for the New York DA say Trump's arguments here, which you just referred to, that the subpoena was too broad, actually stemmed from a false premise that the probe was limited to those so-called, quote, hush money payments. What is the point of this idea that it may be a wider inquiry in terms of potential illegal conduct under review?
Right. So what Trump's lawyers said was, this is too broad a subpoena. You're asking for too much stuff. And the New York prosecutor's response, Ari, is to say, we're asking for too much stuff because we have evidence that you've committed too many crimes. And that, the public record says that. And indeed here, one of the most, interesting nuggets here is that the Trump organization's own CFO, Alan Weissenberg, testified 2 years ago before a grand jury under a grant of immunity, which suggests that he thought there was possible criminal wrongdoing for himself or the Trump organization, and he's testified. And what these prosecutors are simply trying to do is, just like if this was a case against you or me, they just want to know what the financial records was. And if this were anyone else, these records would have been given to the prosecutors years ago. There's a reason why Trump is pushing back on it so much, and I don't think it's because the documents show he's innocent.
Right. You make a great point there, which is while candidates and politicians have reasons they don't want stuff to go public, if you think you can resolve or end an inquiry by privately saying, no, look, here's my book of good health, you're good, it'll go away, we're not seeing that reaction here.